Welcome to CNN Talk. We've got a special announcement to make, haven't we?
Oh, we have, yes.
Should we sing?
1, 2, 3.
Let's not do that. Oh, Spanish. We should explain.
There you go.
Issa's with us, because we're covering the Spanish elections as well as Liam's birthday.
It's a historic moment.
Are
We have a graphic for Liam's birthday.
We have a word cloud for Liam's birthday.
Oh, dude! all it needs to say is 60.
Oh, that's vicious.
Harsh but fair. Thank you for that.
Take us away from this, Issa. Where have you been for the last week?
I have been in sunny, well, not so sunny Spain. In fact, it was raining. I've been up and down the country, mostly visiting an area called El Ejido, which is in Andalusia. It is one of the key areas that supported Vox, the party that's now got into Parliament for the first time since the death of Francisco Franco in 1975. And really, I've been trying to gauge the mood of what drives so many within that town, specifically in Andalusia, to vote for the right. It's various reasons.
They were voting centre-right before, were they, presumably?
Yeah, many voting centre-right, but there are many reasons why many parts of Andalusia have supported it. There is people are tired of the traditional two-party system that we've been seeing in Spain. A question of Catalonia also still continuing to rear its head. Migration, nationalism, these are all topics I'm sure we'll talk about. But migration in particular in El Ejido, because the number of migrants coming in continue to rise. In fact, it's one of the main entry points from Europe, Mediterranean, in terms of going into Spain. So lots of people there voting for Vox because they believe that traditional parties have basically ignored them.
Sorry again, basically.
It is. It's fed up with politics as usual. And that's what's happening in this country to an extent. You look at the rise of Nigel Farage's new Brexit party, which it was formed 3 weeks ago. It's already leading the polls for the European elections. And their platform is essentially just railing against the elites, the establishment, betrayal of Brexit, etc., etc. They have no policies apart from a clean Brexit. And when you push Nigel Farage on, well, OK, if you win an election, what would you then do? You don't get much of a response. And this is happening in France, it's happening in Germany, it's happening in Italy, especially Italy. And so it's not confined just to one country at all.
What did you make of the result?
Well, I have to say I breathed a sigh of relief because a lot of the media was really, really hyping up like a sweeping win for the right and Vox, which is a particularly kind of aggressive strain of kind of conservatism. And so I was relieved that Sanchez, they've lost their majority, but it did look like the socialists and the sort of left and the sort of progressives were still a force there. But I kind of agree with my panellists. There's also another big thing which has shaped the mood in Spain, and that is the issue of Catalan independence, which has kind of, sort of really hamstrung Spanish politics for such a long time. We have been sort of trapped in this cycle of what happens with Catalan. That's angered a lot of people, that has pushed them towards Vox. I mean, lots of analysts in Spain and political commentators and watchers taking a step back have expressed a great frustration that nationalism has hamstrung Spain's ability to be playing a bigger role in what's happening in the EU right now. So in a way, this kind of scourge of nationalism rising up again. We actually have it in the United Kingdom as well. This weekend, there was a lot of talk about Scottish independence. Scots and the Catalans have developed a close political alliance over independence.
But somehow Scottish nationalism, it seems to be acceptable because it's promoted by a left-of-centre party, whereas other forms of nationalism are considered unacceptable.
Well, I wouldn't say that. It was pretty nasty during the referendum campaign. It got very, very heated up there in Scotland. It's quelled now because everyone said it was...
Welcome to CNN Talk. We're discussing the Spanish election result. Why is the far right on the rise in Europe?
Spain's Socialist Party is celebrating its election victory. It won the most parliamentary seats in Sunday's hotly contested general election, but fell short of an outright majority. So now it's on to the hard task of forming a governing coalition.
What we have right here is a very fractured political landscape, in part because of Vox.
Obviously, they're not going to be big players, but there's a trend there.
Vox is Spain's first elected far-right party since the death of dictator Francisco Franco in 1975, with a pledge of national unity to put a stop to corruption and illegal immigration.
One cannot underestimate the significance of gaining about 10% of the votes and entering into the Spanish parliament for the first time.
This is a big gain for them.
Have your say on our Facebook feed. Kelly says racism, that's why the far right is on the rise in Europe. Elizabeth says it's because of xenophobia. Sergio says society is so far left at the moment, so far right is actually centre. What do you think? Let us know on the Facebook feed. Welcome to our viewers listening on Apple Podcasts as well. Isa has been in Spain for the whole of the week. You focused on an area where they did vote far right.
They did.
Actually, the ultimate result for the far right wasn't as high as people had predicted. But
I was speaking to one of the Vox representatives in Elegido in Andalusia in southern Spain, and he was expecting everything up to 50 votes. So, in fact, they didn't do as well as many people expected. But let's put it into context. This is the first time a far-right party is getting into parliament since the dictator Francisco Franco. So, and they will have their say and their votes when it comes to policies and issues in parliament. So it is important. We shouldn't ignore that. The fact they won 0.04% of the vote in 2016 regional, they now got, 2.5 million votes, 10%. It's quite significant. It cannot be ignored. But the reason this particular area of Spain, why they voted for them, was out of frustration with traditional parties, in particular PP, lots of corruption cases there. And in fact, Vox was created out of politicians who had had enough of PP politics, and as a splinter group. That's how it started. So disenchantment with traditional parties, but also, like one of your viewers was commenting on racism, not racism, but also the question of illegal migration.
Aisha, some of the policies of the Vox, if we have a look at them, anti-separatist, wants to abolish autonomous regions, opposes radical feminism, abortion, same-sex marriage, strongly opposes irregular immigration, has proposed border wars with Morocco. Interestingly as well, they're pro-Europe, which is unusual for a far-right
Yes, it is,
Europe.
because Europe seems to be the sort of easy go-to blame kind of thing for everything that's wrong in society right now. But yeah, no, they're a very strong strain on the right. And the thing that sort of caught my eye the most is they're very, very anti what they call radical feminism, but actually they're just anti-gender equality, very, very anti-LGBTQ rights as well. I actually first came to know about them quite a while ago because some of my friends, my female friends out in Spain, brought it to my attention. They were sort of campaigning and saying, look, there is this kind of political movement and it is really, really quite sort of troubling, and yet it has sort of shot up. So I think a lot of women who campaign for gender equality in Spain are very, very worried about this. But the thing that's interesting is that they're very much aping the language of the alt-right, which is having its moment at the moment, from America right through to Salvini. The phrase sort of Spain first, of course, is something which they're sort of promulgating. That's the thing that Donald Trump used to great effect. They're aping the sort of language from Franco's time, that very hyper-internalised nationalism. I mean, the fascinating thing about Spain is Spain has always quite prided itself on being quite an outward-looking country. When the revolution happened, people came from all over the world to Spain. Spain is, you know, a language which is spoken all over the world. Yet this is a movement which seems to want to very much kind of build walls, look internally.
And on that point, in fact, Alicia, is really interesting because words like reconquest, which is what they've been using, going back to the Moors, of course, but also make Spain great again. And they've been endorsed by Steve Bannon, the building the wall between Morocco and Spain. They say they're prepared.
How did you build a wall? There's
in
no
between
land
Ceuta and
border.
Melilla, between Ceuta and Melilla on the other side. So they say that we want them to stop if they have to pay for it. They're really taking out of Trump's playbook.
Even if they didn't win the election, they didn't do as well as they had hoped, they still managed to break down the two-party system, which is having a huge impact on, you know, it's a similar sort of strategy we've seen in other countries.
Yeah, this is easily the most divisive election we've seen in Spain, and we've had 4 general elections in recent years. The population's electorally exhausted, and we've got the European elections to come. This is the most divisive election we've seen in Spain since the return of democracy in our lifetimes in the 1970s. To answer the question, there are 3 main reasons, I think, why the hard right, the far right, is on the rise in Europe. One reason is the financial crisis, which led to a big increase in inequality and money printing by central banks has led to a lot more inequality, pushing up asset prices for those that have. The second reason in Spain's case, as in a lot of the southern Mediterranean countries, is the single currency, which has been far too high for their economies. So their economies have suffered. Same in Italy, same in Greece and France to some extent. And the third reason, as Issa said, is the migration crisis. And Spain sees itself, certainly in the south, in Andalusia, to be on the front line of that European frontier. And all those things have combined. But on top of all that, in Spain, in the last couple of years, we've had a twisting of politics because of the botched independence referendum we saw in Catalonia. It's still seen as illegal. 12 secessionist leaders are on trial, for sedition, right? And in the end, it was the separatists that forced this election by forcing a vote of no confidence in Pedro Sanchez, if I'm not mistaken. And if they are needed to form a coalition, and they may be needed, their number of seats, if you have the existing Socialist Party, the incumbent, to get together with the sort of centre-right party, not the PP, the traditional right-wing party, they may still need a few nationalists and separatists in order to make that 176 majority in the Spanish parliament. And if they do, in return, they will want an independence referendum.
Although the VP actually said this morning that they're going to try and govern alone. How exactly that's going to happen, we don't know.
In some kind of confidence and supply, like a minority government.
Correct.
The main party is still way out in front, so it's not fundamentally changed, but the politics has changed in the country, and the smaller parties have become more powerful, haven't they? That's what's interesting.
Yes, although Podemos, I think, have lost seats. I think they've lost about 20 seats, which in some ways is surprising. But I suspect there's actually some transfer between Podemos and Vox. I mean, I don't know if you saw that happening, but often, sort of, if you have the circular theory of politics, the extreme right and the extreme left come together in some ways. I suspect there's a bit of vote swapping going on there.
And Like makes the point, they don't stand for anything, though. They're against everything. Voters don't consider policies.
I think that is a really good point. And you look throughout all of the different countries in Europe that have these kind of parties, whether on the extreme left or the extreme right, people want to protest and they give them the vehicle. The National Front in France has been a good example of this over the last 20 or 30 years, where they've grown in popularity, not because of any positive thing that they've put forward, because of all the negative things that they say.
I mean, this is the story which is sweeping across Western democracies at the moment. I mean, since the global financial crash, and arguably beforehand, the classic divides in society have become even more entrenched. Those at the top, with lots of money, lots of opportunity, you know, probably categorised by all of us sitting around this sort of table, life's all right for us. It's not all right for a vast number of people who've seen their living standards squeezed. There's deindustrialisation. You know, people are very, very sort of threatened. On top of that, with globalisation, people are but people end up blaming the wrong people. People are fed a liquid cosh of blame the immigrant, blame the others, when in fact they should be looking upwards and blaming the people who have been making the decisions which have, you know, made their lives harder. I mean, the great tragedy.
They are doing that as well.
Well, I don't think they are enough.
Certainly they're blaming the politicians for this. They may not be blaming other people.
No, I think they are in that. So the thing that is fashionable is you blame the immigrants and you blame the others, and you also blame the politicians. There's always a strong marriage between blaming immigrants and a strong sense of anti-elitism, anti-establishment. But it comes back to, and the irony is a lot of people promulgating these arguments are very wealthy men themselves who have done very well from this system. And now they want to play politics, they want to be famous, they want to play the sort of hero in their own movie in their head. You get it, whether it's kind of Brexit, whether it's these separatist movements. But it comes back to the same point, I think, upon which most of us are agreed.
Okay.
They have no solutions. They have nothing to actually make your life better.
We're going to hear from the man at the moment, the Vox Party leader, and get your response to, you know, how you interpreted his language.
And his grammar.
24 lawmakers in Parliament will take on their responsibility to serve Spain in freedom. 24 nationalist lawmakers in Parliament will represent the pride of being Spanish, and they will not remain silent when a lawmaker breaks the Constitution, laughs at our flag, or tries to destroy national unity.
Tapped into something.
He has, and the reason the socialists have done so well is because Vox is pretty much spin to the right into 3 separate parties. And this is something we knew was going to happen. So socialists are obviously celebrating, but he's spot on. There's 24 seats now. They will have a bigger say. And we don't know how they will do in the next coming elections. We've got elections 24th of May, regional elections, European elections as well. But it's interesting what Ian was saying about the question of identity. This is something I noticed when I was in southern Spain. Nationalism played a huge part, but the Catalan fight for independence, that really turned, in many ways, people's opinions about how they saw themselves, how they saw Spain. Straight away, you started seeing Spanish flags in balconies across Spain. And that drove many people to start thinking about identity, trying to unite Spain. The discourse changed significantly in the last several years. And PP failed. The Partido Popular failed because they didn't handle the crisis well, because of corruption charges, and Vox really saw a space for it and gained and went ahead with that.
It's the idea that actually what they're doing in a lot of these countries is breaking down the centre-right.
Yeah.
They are.
Whilst the centre-left is remaining somehow stronger.
And we may well see a coalition. Yeah. Coalitions are unusual in Spanish politics. It's usually minorities, right? But we may well see a coalition to ward off Vox from the incumbent Socialist Party and Cuidados, I think they're pronounced. Excuse my attempts, pathetic as they are. What's interesting to me is Santiago Abascal there for Vox. He says, this is only the beginning. We are here to stay. But Aisha's right. They didn't do... I mean, of course, they've taken the headlines. It's the first... hard right party since Franco, and that's why we're talking, a big reason why we're talking about this. But they did, and they are only 4 years old, as Ian said, but they did very well in regional elections in December, and they did get 10% of the vote. I think a lot of people expected them to get even more than 24 seats, if we're honest. And what's happened is you've had middle-class, moderate Spaniards coming out in droves. This was the third highest turnout of any Spanish election. 76%, very, very high turnout.
The interesting thing I think is that we need to watch now is how they actually perform in Parliament, because often far left or far right parties, when they do get elected, they almost self-combust. We've seen that with various groupings in the European Parliament. UKIP in Britain, for example, they had 24 MEPs elected in 2014. 3 of them remain. Some of them have been, there's been scandals, they've defected, goodness knows what. But this is rather typical of these sort of extreme parties, because they're not used to actually getting any form of power.
No infrastructure.
They don't know how the parliaments operate. When they get there, it's a bit of a shock, and some of them just fall by the wayside.
But also, I'd say more than that, I think for a lot of them, they don't actually really want to govern. They like being a protest movement, and they're very, very good at amplifying, this howl of discontent and this howl of rage. But actually, give them elected office, give them some levers. It's quite hard work doing politics, actually. It's not as fun as doing rallies.
In Italy, aren't you, where the Five Star Movement and the League, a real coalition of differences on the left and on the right, they're starting to split apart now. On the other hand, in Germany, AfD, who are now the official opposition, let us not forget, a very similar party to Vox, albeit they've been around a few years longer, they are now managed to consolidate. They've got 94 seats in the German parliament. They're managing to consolidate their infrastructure and, if you like, grow up as an institution and not be not fooled by the wayside.
I think Vox may surprise us, though, because although Podemos was started off out the financial crisis in Spain and the financial crisis we saw in Spain, in Greece and Portugal, Vox has a lot of disgruntled PP supporters.
Right.
So
experienced
they
politicians.
have experience. So expect them, when it comes to Parliament, to standing their ground. They know how it operates. Yeah. So they will make chances live as difficult as possible. We already know that he's not going to have an easy ride when it comes to building a coalition, because he's going to depend on the Catalans. If he does go with the Catalan, remember the Catalans wanted independence, wanted a referendum on independence.
Could we see another referendum soon?
Well, I honestly think that Pedro Sanchez is not going to want the Catalans. He's probably going to go with the Basques, somewhere Podemos, a minority government, and basically say, actually, I'd much rather not go with the Catalans because there was just too much
heat around it. And there's quite a lot of those even on the sort of centre right who have said that they will not support any alliance, with the separatists or
If you go
anything
into
like
a
that.
coalition with them, the suspicion is that you've always given them a lot just to get their support.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Absolutely.
And a lot that isn't publicly declared.
Ken on Facebook says he's living in Spain. I think part of the reason for Vox is separatism. Let us know what you think. Isa, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You'll see Isa throughout the day with her analysis. We'll be going back to Spain, presumably.
I probably will.
We'll be back in just a moment. History repeating itself, says John. The rise of the far right is based on the end of white rule, says Olaf.
The end of white rule. What does that mean?
And Mashudos, our friend, says it's the Trump effect.
Well, I think it is partly that.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, as Liam said, you look at some of the language that's deployed here, and it is very, very similar. And it's happening in this country as well to a degree, and I think all over Europe. I think the one that we haven't seen yet, and I think we will see this, I think the story of the European elections is not going to be what happens in Spain. It's not going to be what happens in Germany. It's going to be what happens in France. And I think that Macron is going to get an absolute shellacking in the European elections in France. It will be largely the National Front that gain from that.
I think everyone is. I think all kind of, as we said earlier, anybody who is seen as establishment is going to get an absolute tonking. The Conservatives are going to do really, really badly. Conservatives are going to do very bad at local elections. I think Labour's going to do pretty badly here as well. The story of these EU elections is going to be this is a platform to give voice to the kind of the howls of.
Yeah, but we've just seen it happen in a general election. I agree with you to some extent in the past. Say in 2014, when Farage's UKIP got 27% of the vote here in the UK, the European elections were.
Welcome back to CNN Talk. Spanish election. Why is the far right on the rise throughout Europe? We can show you this map. It shows how these types of parties are doing across Europe. These are countries where they gain more than 10%. So you can see it's pretty widespread. And whilst they're not winning elections, they are having a big impact, particularly in Hungary.
It is, but I think it's really important for the media as well to not slightly overhype this as well. One of the critiques of how the Spanish elections have been covered was it was almost like the media had already written the script.
I agree with
because
that.
they wanted, Vox to have got, like four,
And they didn't do as well as we
and they didn't.
expected,
Everyone's
really.
like, oh, the other thing, Germany you mentioned, AfD did well. However, we were also focused on that. The Greens did very well in Germany as well. So I think it's important to be balanced in our critique. We, as sort of media commentators, have to be careful not to sort of drive the. Yes, the right is rising, but also the left is rising as well.
The Greens have been in government and in Parliament for all our lives in Germany, and this was the first. This was the first hard right party in Germany since the Second World War.
And the Greens aren't really considered extreme in Germany in the same way that they might be in other countries.
That's still part of the story, and we always just focus on the right.
Just looking at that map, I mean, Switzerland, 29%, that is quite incredible when you think of Switzerland
we were
as a
surprised.
country.
We haven't heard much about that.
But if you had extended those percentages to the east a bit, I wonder, I mean, you've got Hungary, 68%.
Hungary's like two parties.
Well, I mean, I think if you looked at some of those other Eastern European countries, you'd be quite horrified at the percentages in those as well.
You've got a party in power in Poland that a lot of people would have seen to be quite extreme.
Ash says, Trump's success is a brilliant light for the world to follow. Lots of comments on Trump on the Facebook feed suggesting he plays into this. Let's have a look at the word cloud and see what that comes up with, showing the emotion really coming through on the Facebook feed. And look, you can see that. What is that? It's a sad emoji.
It's like a constant.
And then we've got a really angry emoji there at the bottom as well.
Trump doesn't feature in that, does he? That's
Trump a little bit up there.
Small. Yeah, a little bit.
A little bit up there.
Far right and, bigger, obviously, than left. When we look ahead to the European elections, people vote differently in European elections. And you've made the point that this is different because it's a general election, but it is going to have an effect on those European elections.
I think in the past we've seen European elections almost like we see local elections, not as important as general elections for national parliaments, and they're not as important, of course. But what's interesting about the election in Germany that we saw, and now the election in Spain, these are general elections. These are where turnout is very, very high, 76%, as I said, in Spain. And while Aisha's completely right, Vox didn't do as well as we thought they were going to do. They still did a lot better than anyone could have predicted just a few years ago when they were formed. So I think the fact that this is happening in a general election in Spain and a twisting of Spanish politics into identity politics, and this isn't a one-off, of course, this is happening in many other European countries too. And a lot of it does come back to the economics, as I said, from the global financial crisis, and then the euro, which I'm afraid has split apart a lot of these Mediterranean countries from Northern Europe economically in terms of prosperity, the exchange rate simply too high for them, and then into the brew in Spain, the whipping up of identity politics because of the rise of separatism.
But European elections are an opportunity for the electorate to protest in a way that they don't see as that important. In a general election, I would normally vote Conservative. Twice in European elections, I voted for UKIP because I wanted to send a message to the government. I know you're looking absolutely shocked by that, aren't you?
Can I move my seat, please?
But that is what a lot of people do. And what I think we're going to find on May the 23rd, when the European elections happen, is that I think there are about 750 seats in the European Parliament. It wouldn't surprise me if about 200 of those were from parties like Vox, parties like the National Front. And that would be transformational in terms of European representative politics. And I don't think anybody quite understands what the impact that
Here's
would
a UK
have.
poll looking ahead to those elections. We should explain that the Brexit Party is run by Nigel Farage, used to run UKIP, and very much led that campaign for the referendum in the first place here.
I mean, I sort of kind of push back at what Liam was saying about how EU votes are just a protest thing. Actually, the EU elections had a profound effect on British politics.
I didn't say that. Maybe I didn't express it
sorry,
well.
OK. Well, in terms of, it really, really shaped, because our political leaders got very, very frightened of Nigel Farage. The Conservative Party was trying to be sort of dragged further towards the right. Even parts of the Labour Party were trying to be dragged further to the right on immigration and things like that. We ended up having this EU referendum because David Cameron was very, very worried about the rise of UKIP. We thought it would settle the issue, and of course it hasn't settled the issue. And I think Ian is right. We can be sort of dispassionate commentators in terms of, this is all going to be very interesting. I agree. I think there will be a huge spike in right-wing support, but that has very, very serious, profound consequences. It has huge consequences for the EU, but it also has huge consequences for, how our public policy is going to be done as well. And I'll tell you something, right now, if you are somebody from one of those minority communities, and actually Vox isn't even just targeting minority communities, it's targeting an entire gender, saying that actually we want to roll back a lot of the rights that you've won, from reproductive rights to abortion rights to violence against women's sort of rights. That is very, very deeply troubling. If you're an ethnic minority, if you're an LGBTQ person, if you are somebody who pushes for gender equality rights, these rights have been hard fought for decades and decades and decades. And it does look like there's going to be a very, very big pushing back. So I think this is a very dangerous moment.
That's really interesting that Vox have been so upfront about all of those things, because people always are suspicious of any right-wing party that that's what they want to do. But they've been absolutely overt about it, but in a way that I think the Front National in France have not.
The Catholic Church is much, much stronger in Spain, particularly southern Spain, than it is in France.
Absolutely.
Spain is a much more agrarian country than France. Fewer people live in big cities, and these people feel disenfranchised. And so that's why Vox is fishing in those waters. There were academic studies just a couple of months ago, before these Spanish elections, before the rise of the Brexit Party. Ian talks about 200-odd seats out of 750 in the European Parliament. Academic studies were saying a third of the European Parliament, even then, could go to more extreme parties. So it could be even higher than 200.
Andrew is pushing back a bit on this sort of Trump narrative. He's saying Europe had this problem long before Trump came along.
That's absolutely right. I mean, this has been a festering sore in European politics, I would say, for at least 20 years, if not longer. It started, I think, with the National Front in France. They were the sort of catalyst, and then I think it sort of spread almost like a disease through other countries to one degree or another. But, I mean, there are lots of smaller countries that have this as well. You look, I mean, we think of Scandinavian countries as beacons of peaceful coexistence. You look at the Swedish Democrats, you look at Belgium, you look at the Netherlands.
True Finns.
So, true Finns. This is not confined to some of the bigger countries.
But Trump provided the language.
Absolutely.
That's what Issa was suggesting about the Spanish election.
I completely agree. Trump made it permissible to be really open about these things. And I would argue that this virus of, you know, kind of hard right nastiness, to be honest, has always been with us. It has been with us time immemorial. It's been with us from Hitler's Germany. It's never really gone away. It's like a cancer that is able to pop up at any time.
Maybe it's better that it's out in the open.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I mean, I think what's better is that you try and sort of fight it. It's always going to be with us.
You can't fight it if you don't know about it. And the fact that it's out in the open now means that people can see what it is and then try to come up with some kinds of policies to counter it.
Partly fighting it is not kind of giving into it. And I think that's the really dangerous point. You can always blame people from a different background. You can always blame people from a different colour of skin. You can always find lazy excuses. It doesn't take away the fact that some of the problems, some of it is structural, some of it is economic. I'm afraid some of it is bad feeling and just nastiness.
Some of it is, but I think it is a mistake to tar everybody with the same brush and say, well, they're all racist. A lot of them have legitimate concerns.
Sure, but some of them definitely do. And I'm afraid if you don't... The story that history tells, if you don't fight racism, you've got a problem in your hands.
Melinda says at least Spain didn't elect a far-right president. And Tenacious says, as a taxpayer, I'm fed up with socialist parties that aim to share the wealth rather than to require people to be productive. Have your say on our Facebook feed. Thank you for watching.
Best comment of the day.